Welcome to Access Live. I am Brad Onishi, co-host of Straight White American Jesus, author of American Caesar, How Theocrats and Tech Lords Are Turning America into a Monarchy, founder of Access Media, here with my friend and colleague, Matthew Taylor. How you doing, Matt?
I am doing okay, Brad. Made it through a very, very hot fourth in the mid-Atlantic here.
Did you, I pray that you were not down at the National Mall, scrambling with the masses to take cover and find shelter and all that stuff.
I had the good sense not to go anywhere near Washington, D.C. on the 4th, but it was pretty stormy in Baltimore too.
All right, y'all. This is Access Live, our Tuesday live show. We're here on YouTube, we're here on Substack, and some of you might be catching this later on one of those channels or listening to the podcast. Welcome. We have a great show today. We're going to talk about Patriot Front marching on the National Mall on July 4th and the historical precedents, unfortunately, that it recalls, that their march recalls, and get into what that means for our current political moment. We'll then do something that some of you have been asking for and wanted to take a chance to do today, and that is spend a few minutes talking about the difference between theocracy and theonomy. And this does have importance. Don't, it might sound really nerdy or in the weeds, but those terms get thrown around a lot by journalists and others. And so we want to dissect them and tell you the difference so that you have a nice, concise explanation. Then we have special guests. We have a guest every week. We've had amazing. And today we have Congressman Jared Huffman, who is the standing member. What's the word I'm looking for? The senior member of the Natural Resources Committee for the Democrats in Congress, and they released a video about how Trump hijacked the 250th celebration that is absolutely damning. Dan and I talked about it Friday for a little bit. There's more to say, and he's going to join us and give us some of the inside scoop on what he saw as a member of Congress from the inside. So stay tuned for that. All right, Matt, as we sort of get into this, let's just cue up a little video, I don't know, from 100 years ago. You sent me this morning, and it's a nice 3 minutes. Some of you are like, Brad, I'm not on video. What's happening? You got to give me the play-by-play. And what's happening is 40,000 KKK members are marching in Washington, D.C., in downtown Washington. They are in black and white footage wearing their Klan robes. And this is from 1925. 1925 is, in essence, the height of the KKK that began in 1915, the second KKK. And in 1925, some scholars would say that there were millions of members of the KKK. There were certainly mayors and state congresspeople. There were sitting congresspeople and some governors who were part of the KKK. Those numbers often don't include women and young people who were part of the KKK through church communities and other outreach efforts. The KKK was a big, and I would gander to say mainstream institution in this country for a long time. So we're seeing some of this coverage. Matt, let me stop and just jump in here. Patriot Front marched on the National Mall this July 4th in ways that were eerily similar to what happened 100 years ago. I can show that video now, or I can let you jump in. You tell me. What do you want to do?
I just want to think for a minute before we get to the Patriot Front about some of the patterns we see in American history. This phrase "America First" is becoming very popular in certain circles on the right. I've talked on some of the Access Daily Brief about Tucker Carlson and some of the folks who have embraced this. But that phrase, America First, was not original to Donald Trump in 2015. It was not original to Pat Buchanan in the 1990s. It goes back to this era. It goes back to World War I, and then especially to the 1920s, where it became very popular in American politics by the KKK. And the KKK took that phrase, America First, and used it, filled it with kind of white supremacist ideas, even eugenicist ideas about purifying the blood of the nation, purifying the genes of the nation, right? And then it was also embraced by the Nazis, by American Nazis, by the American German Bund in the 1930s, in the lead up to World War II. And so when we see these folks like Patriot Front showing up today and marching in DC in force, it harkens back to Charlottesville in 2017 and the Unite the Right rally, but it also harkens back to these other moments in American history where we've seen white supremacy, kind of white hegemony, Christian nationalism, and the KKK was a Christian nationalist organization, right? We use that. That's not usually the terminology that we use historically for it, but when we use the modern phrase Christian nationalism, we're also thinking back to movements like the KKK that have bolstered a sense of Christian patriotism, Christian power in society, Christian exclusion of other people. And so now I think it might be good to now show Patriot Front. What we know, there's varying news reports that range from 400 to 700 of these Patriot Front guys who showed up in Washington, D.C. on July 4th. They rode the metro, and there's a photo, the very famous photo that was photographed by a Reuters photographer of a black woman sitting on the DC metro surrounded by these Patriot Front guys. Why don't we show the video of them marching on the mall?
So we have here a lineup of Patriot Front folks who are marching in a kind of semi-military lineup, carrying various iterations of the American flag along with other flags. There is quite a long line here. This is, as Matt said, a couple hundred people for sure. It's certainly not 10,000. It's certainly not 40,000, but this is a big group. If you saw this group marching down your main street, there's enough here. There's a Confederate flag going by us now. Other Confederate flags in the lineup. So this is what was present on the National Mall for our nation's 250th anniversary.
And I think it's worth thinking about how these groups are laying claim to American patriotism. So this group, Patriot Front, actually got founded in the aftermath of Charlottesville. It was a breakaway group from another white supremacist neo-Nazi group, and they've become quite popular over time. Again, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of members, but thousands of people who are identifying, maybe even into the tens of thousands of people who are identifying with a movement like Patriot Front that ultimately wants to see the end of American society as we know it. They're using patriotic symbols, but they want to do away with pluralism, with democracy. They want to create a fascist state. And I'm not using that euphemistically. I'm not saying like, oh, they're fascist, as though that was something that was insulting to them. They identify as fascist. And even in the symbolism that they use, if you look at some of the flags that they carry, yes, they're carrying Confederate flags. Yes, they're carrying the Betsy Ross flag to harken back in American history, but they are also carrying the Patriot Front flag, which features fascist symbols built into it with American colors. And so we're not just thinking here about Christian nationalism or people who vote for Donald Trump. These are extremists, and they are performing these ways, performing this kind of patriotic, fascistic kind of melodrama in front of us on July 4th on the National Mall. And one word of caution here, because I think a lot of people would read this as though they were there in support of Donald Trump. And I'm not actually sure that they are there in support of Donald Trump. Often what you find in these, the Patriot Front and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and some of the other figures who are embracing this kind of old America First identity, they are often doing that today in rebellion against Donald Trump and against what is mainstream MAGA. They are very frustrated over things like the war in Iran, over kind of foreign interventionism, over the American alliance with Israel. Remember, these folks are also deeply anti-Semitic, right? And so there's this kind of antipathy and animosity towards Israel. And so I'm not suggesting that these people were there necessarily supporting Trump. I think they are laying claim to a different American heritage in certain ways of white supremacy, of Christian power, of a vision that is not a Christian Zionist evangelical kind of old school vision. This is almost an older school vision that kind of predates modern evangelicalism, that is now being revived and weaponized in our politics. And I'll probably have this in a daily brief later this week, but I think there's a real possibility that we could see a third party emerging in this kind of America First space. That these are kind of the spearhead of that, the point of the spear of this burgeoning new movement of American Christian anti-Semitism, American Christian anti-interventionism. Kind of the if you think back, right, like Trump had these two slogans, right? Make America great again and America First. And he kind of paired those in 2015, 2016. We're seeing those fracture right now into two different factions on the far right. And it's not that these people are more far right than Trump. They're just a different kind of far right.
I want to come back to a couple of things, but the principal one I want to come back to is just how does this relate to religion, Christian nationalism, Christian supremacy? This is just old school white nationalism. Is that what this is? Is this just old school American racism and xenophobia? I mean, I can hear people who would say, "Look, you guys are religion scholars. That's great. You're very tied into the Christian nationalist beat and the pulses around the country, the Christian supremacists, and so on. But this is just white nationalism. This is just white supremacy. Come on, let's not make it more complicated than that." So what I would say to that is this: if you listen to the show, you know that there's a book here that I just think is really essential for anyone to read. It's by Kelly J. Baker, Gospel According to the Klan. If you read this book, you're going to walk away knowing definitively that when the KKK of the 1915s, the 1920s, the 1925s presented itself as a Protestant American group. They would show up at churches. They would sponsor picnics. They would bring in a male choir to sing at church. And they would say, "Look, we're God-fearing Protestants who do not want our country to be invaded by infidels like Catholics or Jews, or for Black people to be roaming free and without, supervision. This is just what God wants, and we're doing this in the name of Jesus." So it was not an add-on. It was not a supplement. It was not a, well, yeah, if we're talking over here at church, we'll mention Jesus. No, 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 no. There was a deep and abiding theology of white Christian supremacy that came from the KKK period. It was baked in, to use Dan Miller's language, it was in the code of the KKK. So that's there, right? And so if you read Kelly's book, you'll get that. When I think of Patriot Front, I do not think of an organization that is coming directly from a certain religious group, organization, et cetera. But what I've said on this show many times, and I'll say again, and I'm curious about your thoughts here, Matt, is these groups often find religious imagery and symbolism to be very helpful to the story they want to tell. So even if they are not themselves, as Patriot Front, articulating an explicit theology of Christian supremacy, or if that is not the first thing that comes out of their mouth, what I have witnessed, and I'm sure you've witnessed this more, Matt, just knowing your work, is that when groups like this encounter some of the Christian supremacist groups that we talk about all the time, whether they're coming from a Reconstructionist background in the Doug Wilson extended universe, whether they're coming from certain rad trad Catholic spaces, whether they're just coming from the kind of Sean Foyt, influencer, I need protection, Proud Boys, come be my security kind of guys, or the New Apostolic Reformation proper. When Patriot Front meets those Christian groups, they often find ways very quickly to become allies and at least boost each other. They may not merge. They don't become one blob of fascist whatever, but the resonances are deep. I was at a protest. I'll just give you one more thing, Matt, and see what you think of this. But I was at a protest 5 years ago, and we're outside a church that was hosting a hate speaker, and some people showed up across the street to ostensibly protect the church, I guess. I don't know. They were Proud Boys. And when everyone got out of church, some of them walked over and wanted to talk to us who were protesting, and that was fine. We had discussions, we had debates, they offered donuts. Nobody agreed. It was fine. No violence, no heated language. No, I'm going to hurt you, you're going to hurt me. None of that. Okay, great. But the Proud Boys are over there sort of like, yay, you know, you try it, we're going to jump in. And then as some of the people are leaving church, they're like talking to the Proud Boys. They're like, hey, Jeff, you coming to lunch? Michael, you going to make the barbecue? Okay, we'll see you at the barbecue, Mike. And it was one of these moments where I'm like, these people from this church are inviting the Proud Boys, who they clearly hang out with all the time, to the barbecue, to the luncheon, to the Father's Day celebration, whatever. That's what I'm getting at with Patriot Front and Christian supremacy. Does that ring true for you in your work, Matt? How does that hit?
Yeah, there's a massive fraction. It's not half of the country, but it's probably 20%, maybe even verging into 30% of the country that has functionally given up on democracy. And that's what I mean when I talk about far right. There's like, we can talk about kind of right wing, left wing, right? I would say anything that I would call right wing, left wing is within the realm of liberal democracy, participating and accepting the kind of premises of liberal democracy, checks and balances, all these sorts of things. Once you get into far left and far right, you're talking about movements that have given up on democracy and are pushing in other directions, moving towards other forms of politics. And what has happened in the Trump era, which I count the last 10 years as the Trump era, since really the 2016 campaign, even during the Biden presidency, we were still in the Trump era, whether we knew it or not. And I think what has happened in the Trump era is that we've seen all these different forces on the far right kind of congeal around Donald Trump and around certain narratives of Christian supremacy, narratives of white supremacy, narratives of American exceptionalism, narratives of American power, narratives of male hegemony, right? All of these things kind of build together and form together. And part of what's happening there is these people are moving towards authoritarianism. And authoritarianism justifies existing power structures and reinforces them. And so rich people get richer, men get more power because they already have power, white people get more power because they already have power, right? And Christians get more power in our society because they already have power. And so all of these folks, they see common cause. They can have all kinds of rivalries, they can have all kinds of disagreements, but as long as they are pushing in the same direction of disrupting and ultimately undermining and destroying American democracy, they can recognize some common cause. Now, again, if you grabbed any member of Patriot Front off the streets of DC and asked them as they're sweating through their weird little uniforms, what do you believe? What do you, how do you think? They're probably going to disagree with each other on a lot of things as well, right? I think of it this way. I think of the kind of Christian far right has like different hemispheres of the brain, different parts of the brain. And Christian vocabulary is kind of that corpus callosum that communicates between them, right? The Christian vocabulary is part of what holds all this interface together. It can hold the white supremacist Christians together in the same coalition with the more multi-ethnic kind of global Christian supremacists. It can hold the female leaders like Paula White Cain in league with overt misogynists like Doug Wilson, right? And kind of keep them all together, working together. And that is kind of the force that Trump has played. Now, part of what's happening though is we're moving towards a kind of post-Trump era, right? There will come a point, and it might happen by him passing away through natural causes. It might happen through him not running in the 28 election and becoming kind of politically irrelevant. But there will come a time where the American far right is going to move on. And that's part of what we're seeing groups position. And what Patriot Front is doing here is they are taking a position. They're saying, we want to have a say in American politics. And we're going to do this highly symbolic gesture on the 4th of July, on the 250th anniversary, as all these people are in DC, to show that we are also a part of American life and we have an agenda that we want to accomplish. And that is what the KKK was also doing in 1925 and 1926 when they staged these big rallies on the National Mall. They were trying to claim territory and say, we have a role to play in American politics. Mm-hmm. And for most of the history of the last 50 years, groups like Patriot Front did not have a role to play. Yeah. They were seen as on the fringes. They were seen as they were marginalized. They aren't marginalized anymore. Yeah. And that's what they're claiming. That's what they were claiming in Charlottesville. That's what they're claiming today.
When, you know, there are a couple comments here before we go to break. One is Sarah Longwell at the Bulwark had a piece over the weekend about how people in focus groups are starting to sound different. That there's people and men in focus groups that are starting to talk about the 19th Amendment, repealing the 19th Amendment, right? And is it a lot? No. Is it a majority? No. But like, even for people to sort of articulate that as an acceptable political position in 2026 is drastically different than anything from the last 50 to 75 years in this country. I had a thought about Patriot Front on the Mall this weekend. It's the 250th anniversary. It's the 4th of July. The 4th has been hijacked by Trump. We know that. It's already been tainted. Everybody's already thinking of the 4th as this sort of thing that's been polluted by Trump. The reflecting pool is tore up. There's guardsmen walking around. They're going to set off so many fireworks. It's going to have air pollution in the metro area, blah, 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 blah. But when you see the footage, right, Matt, like when you see the footage of the KKK from, 100 years ago, you're like, oh, wow, look at that. Viscerally, it's terrible. I can't believe this. This is disgusting. And I think that when there's historical distance, the outrage and shock can come quickly because you're like, well, yeah, it was 100 years ago. I don't have to deal with that world anymore. And I am outraged that it exists. And then these guys show up like live on the metro in DC in 2026. And one of the things that I think a lot of people are tempted to do, myself included, are laugh them off. Oh, look at these losers, look at these jerks, look at these idiots. You're nobody, you're not going to ever win in America, whatever. Because you don't want to and I'm trying to like go through the mechanics of the psychological sort of stages here. I think you don't want to believe that they're actually a viable part of the American conversation, as you just said. Like, oh, you guys are a joke. Oh, you're nothing. You have no foothold in this country. And they actually do. It's one of those moments where when something actually happens, like Nazis standing in your nation's capital, psychologically, I think we put up barriers to not sort of accept that that's where we are now. I'll give you one more example. You and I, over the last, 3, 4, 5 years, have had experiences I gander you never thought you would have. How many times have you been on TV over the last couple of years? Right? Not because you're Matt and you want to be rich and famous. It's because you've done really great work on Christian nationalism and people have called you to interview.
Rich and famous would be nice too, though.
Rich and famous. Okay, yeah. Just
if I can get there someday.
If anyone's listening, we'll take it. You've been on NPR. You've been and here's been my experience with those things, Matt. Is like I'm so grateful and it's fun to do that stuff. But there's also times when you're like, oh, this is what this is. It's actually it's certainly not as glamorous as it seems. Like there's friends that are like, you were on NPR. And I'm like, I was. It was very stressful. I was like talking to a blank screen. I was not in a fancy Manhattan office. I was like in my basement. It's not nearly as glitzy as you might imagine. What's my point is like when something like you never thought would happen happens, sometimes you're like, oh, it's that? All right. Yeah, it's not as a big deal as I thought. I think that's the temptation when Patriot Front shows up and be like, these are losers who have no part in our conversation. This is not actually real. It's just a bunch of jerks trying to get attention. It is actually real. And it is actually part of American politics today. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think that, yeah, we have these psychological habits that want to synthesize and normalize what we see around us. And so we have spent 10 years accommodating Donald Trump and these extreme things that he and people in his administration say, to the point where they're kind of water off a duck's back now. And people are like, oh, he doesn't really mean that, or, oh, that's just Trump, right? But that's also what is happening to the culture of our politics, is ideas that would have seemed laughable 10 years ago are now being promoted by cabinet secretaries and by the president of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And groups that, I mean, think about like the January 6th crowds and the sentiment about them in the few days after January 6th, that this was horrible. There was an attack on our democracy. Now they're talking about paying those people out, and they've all been pardoned, and they are being integrated into the Trump administration, and they are running for local offices all over the place.
Yep.
Right. So this normalization that is going on, I think it is that kind of frog in boiling water dynamic where we get used to this stuff and we start to accept it, and we start to think that everyone's still playing by the old rules. I mean, even when the KKK was on the rise in the 1920s, people would confront them and say, you're anti-Semitic. you're racist. They would say, oh, no, we're just a civic group. Like there's long been this game that's played in our politics of extremist groups trying to mainstream themselves and normalize themselves. That is happening right now. And extremist groups and extremist leaders are becoming more and more integrated into Republican politics and right-wing politics. And I think that if we don't keep some sense of historical measure and perspective on all of this stuff, we could very easily lose our democracy in the space of a few years by these groups becoming normalized and becoming accepted.
Well, yeah, we need to switch topics here. I'll just say quickly, like, we can remind people of the Nazi group chat leaks from young Republicans. Like, how many of them have we had? We can remind people of Charlottesville. We can remind people of the fact that people that the Trump administration have nominated for transportation posts, interior posts, have been people who have posted white nationalist social media things for years. As you said, I think one way to envision this is the J6 rioters have been pardoned, and now there is a chance they're running for mayor, city council, school board, state senator in your community. That's how this happens. So,
and I just observe as well, again, there are factions on the far right. There's a faction of extremist Christian Zionists on the far right that many of the people that I study, many of the NAR leaders and Paula White Cain, the people who surround Donald Trump and encourage and support the alliance with Israel and the war in Iran, that is also emerging from far right extremism, right? And there's a far right extremist reaction against that. But both of those are now mainstream in right-wing politics today. And so if you're feeling like, oh, I don't support the war in Iran, that doesn't mean you need to sympathize with these folks, right? There are extremists who are pulling the country in opposite directions, but they are all finding traction in our politics right now.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about the difference between theocracy and theonomy. If you're on the pod, we'll take a short break. And if you're with us live, hang out, and we're going to talk about the difference between theocracy and theonomy. Before that, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has subscribed to Access Mundi Media on Substack. We have moved all of our work over to Substack. And what that means is Monday through Friday, we're doing something new and that no one else is doing, and that is the Access Daily Brief. Every day we have a religion and politics story that is delivered in video, audio, and text form. So if you want to read, you want to listen, you can watch, you can do it however you want. And it's brought to you by a team of religion and politics experts, people that are scholars and journalists. So today was Dan Miller, who watched the Young Washington movie, so you don't have to. We had Holly Berkeley Fletcher yesterday talking about the sort of idea on the American right that there is a Christian genocide in Nigeria. Holly is ex-CIA analyst and historian and award-winning author. Tomorrow we have Angela Denker, a journalist in the Twin Cities. Later this week, we'll have Matt Taylor, myself. It's an amazing team. And if you want to get that, I need you to ask you to do one thing, and then I'm going to ask you to do two more. Go to our Substack and hit subscribe. You can also go to the Access Daily Brief in the show notes and just subscribe to the podcast feed. There's a podcast. You can tee it up, and it'll be there when you wake up in the morning every weekday. I want to ask you to become a paid member of our Substack so we can do this work. We're here not to be rich and famous, despite what Matt says. We're here to share our expertise with people. And as you can imagine, if we're going to do our Access Daily Brief every day, we have to pay editors and contributors and designers, and it's a team effort. And we could really use your help by way of you becoming a paid member so we can provide this content on a daily basis. That's in addition to this live show and our live show on Friday and all the other episodes of Straight White American Jesus that we do. Finally, I want to ask if you can become a donor. We have a partnering nonprofit, and you can become somebody who gives a tax-deductible donation. Join a growing humanities institution that is trying to step into the gap in our media landscape to help educate people in order to activate people for democracy and against authoritarianism. All right, Matt, I've had a couple people ask me this, and I wanted to do it today. So want to talk about the difference between theonomy and theocracy. This may seem in the weeds, but there is a difference, and you're going to hear these words when it's Doug Wilson, Pete Hegseth, NAR. You're going to hear people say, these Christians just want a theocracy. That's what they're after. And then you're going to hear others say, well, it's actually theonomy. And what's the difference? And so I'm going to give you some quick definitions, Matt. Then you can tell me if you want to like nuance them, add some context, some color, etc. Let's start with theonomy. So both of these words have the word theos in them. And theos is the word for God in Greek. So theos and nomos go together here. Theonomy is God's law. If you are a theonomist, you want your government and your community, your economy, every aspect of your society to be governed and ruled by God's law. When that comes to Christianity, you're often going to hear people say every iota, every letter, every commandment that God has given in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, in the New Testament, all of it still applies. So some of you are like, okay, what does that mean? Well, it means if you're a theonomist, there's a very good chance you think that A, God's law should apply to everything, and B, that means that if you're gay, maybe you should be stoned to death for being somebody who engages in same-sex activity. If you are disobedient to your parents, it might mean you need the death penalty. If you are somebody who commits adultery, there are just harsh and ancient and what I would call retrograde ideas about how law should be applied. If you're a theonomist, there's a chance you want to apply every word of Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and the Mosaic Law to modern American life. The difference is this: theonomists don't want religious leaders or clerics to be the ones in charge of the government. So you can have someone who's like a civil magistrate, an autocrat, Francisco Franco, a monarch, and they can rule according to God's law, even though they're not ordained as a religious leader, even though they're not ordained as a cleric or a pope or something else. Now, theocracy is putting theos and power, right? God's power in charge of everything. And the difference with theocracy is that the people in charge are very much so religious or church leaders. This is a model where the Pope would be in charge of not only the church, but ultimately of the government, or a Muslim leader who would be in charge of the religious and civil aspects of a community. So the difference between theocracy and theonomy in one major sense is that theonomy is harsh. It wants God's law, but it doesn't mean that you have religious leaders as the governors, the magistrates, the monarchs. Theocracy sees the power of the religion and the power of the government merged so that the leaders of one are also the leaders of the other. I got more to say. Matt, poke holes in what I just said, expand on it. What do you got?
Yeah, I want to have some caution about drawing too sharp of a distinction here, because if you think of these, if you think of this as kind of a Venn diagram, right, those two circles overlap greatly. And so, right, so in both cases, there is this, the removal of the separation of church and state for sure, right? Like the church and state now get merged, religion moves to the center, and one particular religion moves to the center of society. If we're thinking even like in terms of biblical narrative, right? Israel, the ancient nation of Israel, it starts out as a theocracy and then becomes a theonomy through the Mosaic Law, right? And especially in the return from exile, you have this movement more into theonomy, where the law is there governing in God's proxy with God's will. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a religious figure at the top of the government.
Yeah.
And sometimes when people say, oh, all these Christian nationalists want to build a theocracy, they'll deny that, because they know this distinction. And they'll say, oh, no, we're not about a theocracy, because they recognize that there are different spheres of authority. Again, a lot of this goes back through kind of Calvinist theology on the Protestant side. And when we talk about dominionism, that sometimes people will throw that phrase out or that word out. Dominionism, there's kind of two brands of dominion theology. There's the Doug Wilson Reconstructionist Calvinist version, and they're the ones who tend to be a little more sophisticated, more erudite. They have big vocabulary words like theonomy that they will throw around, along with words like presuppositionalism and things that it's just like you have to kind of be in their little world to understand how they're using these words, right? And then the more charismatic New Apostolic Reformation style of dominion theology is the Seven Mountains, right? Which is also taking some of these dominion theology ideas, but putting them in this more kind of supernaturalist, revelatory, prophetic package, and then kind of turning it into this strategy for taking over society. Some of those people are theocrats. They genuinely want religious leaders at the top of society, right? Iran is technically a theocracy because the supreme leader is the Ayatollah. The supreme leader is a religious leader. Now, there's bureaucracy, there's different forces and factions within society. And so again, don't think about these as kind of opposites or totally distinct. It's different ways of forming a religious authoritarian government. In one case, it is built around an idea of law, of bureaucracy, of systems and institutions that are built up over a great deal of time that do not necessarily require a kind of charismatic religious leader at the top. Right. And this is how a lot of these folks get around Trump. And especially in the Calvinist circles, you'll sometimes hear them referring to Trump or to other political leaders as a Christian prince. Mm-hmm. Right. They're thinking in terms of he's not a priest. He's not a pastor. He's a prince. He has a political role. But then that itself gets kind of baptized in this vision of a Christian society built around a certain type of law.
Yeah. So let's give some examples and just finish this out. But an example of a theocracy, as you just said, you have Iran, right? The Papal States from the medieval period. If you think about the Pope as a spiritual leader and as a sort of earthly monarch, then you have a theocracy. I would call the Plymouth Bay colony a theocracy. The Plymouth Bay colony was founded by Puritans. You know, you think of John Winthrop, you think of others, and you think of a situation where you cannot vote unless you're part of the church. The churchmen are really in charge of the government of the colony. They make all the decisions. There's, excuse me, there's no separation between the clergy and the magistrate per se. And so you really do have a theocracy in the Plymouth Bay, the Massachusetts colony that was founded in the 1600s. When it comes to theonomy, well, let me say something about theocracy. Can you have a theocracy that is not a theonomy? Now we're really doing it. And you can, because you can have a theocracy where church leaders or religious clerics are in charge of the government, but their theology does not demand that they rule by implementing God's ancient law to the land. So you could have a theocracy where the religious leaders are in charge of the government, but where those religious leaders are not necessarily imposing the Mosaic law, the biblical law, the law from Leviticus or Deuteronomy on everyone. You might think of Vatican City this way. The Pope, in some ways, leader of Vatican City, they're not necessarily imposing the Mosaic law on everybody. Is that a theocracy? Yes. Is it a theonomy? Not really. We could, I don't know, Matt, we could spend the next 2 hours debating that point.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can, I think, and I'm happy for Matt, you tell me what you think of this, is I think you can have a theocracy without a theonomy. Okay. And you can, so I think that's one. When it comes to theonomy, a theonomy really wants to implement something that looks like an ancient way of living. And it wants to go back to what it takes to be God's original intended design for human society from the beginning. So if you are theonomist today and you're a Christian supremacist in the sort of Doug Wilson, R.J. Rushdoony lineage, there's a good chance that you do not want non-Christians to be able to vote, be part of if there is voting in your government, to be a citizen, to have the protection of citizenry. You would see things like adultery, witchcraft, blasphemy, homosexual acts as punishable by death, propagation of idols. So if you have an idol of some kind, a Buddha statue, That would be illegal. You cannot have that at your house, and you probably cannot celebrate non-Christian religions in public at all. You could do so in your heart, in your soul, in your mind, maybe in your home, but that's about it. So those are some further details, I think, about the differences between theocracy and theonomy. You want to add anything here, Matt, before we move on?
I just think we should also recognize, in terms of as an agenda, these have different timelines. And so theocracy tends to require a revolution.
Yeah.
Right. It requires a complete upending of society. That's why you have the Iranian Revolution that puts Ayatollah Khomeini in charge. And theocracy was kind of the vision of Ayatollah Khomeini. He believed that the jurists, the religion scholars should be in charge of society and rule in the stead of the 12th Imam in Shiite Islam. Right, like that's the theocratic vision, and it requires this upending of society to get that order put in place. Theonomy tends to be more slow and creeping. It's enacted over a long period of time, and that's, I think, more the threat today that we experience in the United States is more around these kind of theonomic agendas that sometimes can look kind of banal, can look kind of bureaucratic and simplistic. Like, oh, they changed the way that some of the laws work around this one community in terms of zoning, so that a Muslim community couldn't build their community center, right? Like, oh, well, that it's kind of, but that's part of this kind of theonomic agenda, right? To push other religious identities and perspectives and non-religious perspectives out of the public square, so that religious law and religious kind of bureaucracy can dominate the public square, whoever the person at the top of that is, right? And the theonomists tend to get along with Donald Trump really well, because they don't expect him to have any deep Christian morality or belief. They see him in that kind of role of the Christian prince, of the protector who stands atop the system and protects their interests.
Just to finish this off, I think that what we have in this country right now, if you made me just put a label on it, is creeping theonomy.
Yeah.
It's really hard to have creeping theocracy, because theocracy, as Matt said, demands a revolution where you topple the institutions, you topple any form of liberal democracy or anything else, and you put in place the power of the religious institution, a Muslim sect, the Catholic Church, whatever it may be. By contrast, you can have creeping theonomy in the sense that you can slowly get laws, policies on a local level, a state level, a national level passed and implemented that reflect God's law, even if some of the people implementing them or voting for them are not themselves the kinds of righteous, hardcore Christians that you would need in a theocracy. You can have Donald Trump helping to implement theonomy, because he's going to try to court religious supremacists by promising he'll implement their vision of what they want for reproductive rights, or what they want for immigration status, and so on. It's really hard to have creeping theocracy. You cannot have Donald Trump as the head of a theocracy. He's not a church cleric. He's not really a Christian in the way that you would need to be. It just doesn't work. So I'll just leave that there to finish it off. All right, let's take a break. If you're on the pod, we'll be right back. If not, hang with us. And we're going to move into talking about the ways that Donald Trump hijacked the 4th. And it's really worse than you think. And you're not going to want to miss that. So stick around. All right. Once again, if you're here with us on the video, think about becoming a Substack subscriber. That's where all our work is. And becoming a paid subscriber helps us do this work live twice a week. It also helps us do the daily brief Monday through Friday. So you can find the daily brief in the show notes. You can subscribe to the podcast feed. And I just can't say enough how proud I am of the work that we're doing and the kinds of analysis that we're providing, and I don't think anyone else is. So check out our Substack. You can become a paying member. It just supports public scholarship on religion and politics in a moment when, I don't know, Patriot Front's marching on the mall. PragerU is what's being implemented as the educational resources for the 250th anniversary, stuff like that. All right, Matt, you've seen this video, but here is a little bit of a video that Congressman Jared Huffman, who will join us momentarily, put out last week ahead of the 4th of July celebrations as ranking member on the National Resources Committee for the Democrats. And he lays out here in detail how the 250th celebration was not only hijacked, but injected with rampant corruption.
America's 250th birthday is being run by a shadow company you've never heard of. Freedom 250 has raised millions of dollars. It's selling access to the president, and it won't tell you who's paying or where the money goes. This is how Trump hijacked America's birthday. By rewriting the rules to let the ultra-wealthy and politically connected take advantage of the American people. I'm Congressman Jared Huffman. I lead the Democrats on the House Natural Resources Committee. We've spent the past year trying to uncover the truth about what happened, and I want to walk you through exactly what we've found. So how did this private company end up running America's official 250th celebration, siphoning off millions of taxpayer dollars and harvesting Americans' personal data? Let's start at the beginning.
All right, I'm going to summarize, Matt. So we have a situation where, as I said on Friday with Dan, Trump cannot get control of the celebration committee for America 250 for the sequicentennial. Because he can't get control of it, he does two things. He squeezes the money that was supposed to go there, reducing the money that was supposed to go to this nonpartisan nonprofit that would help plan and implement the celebration. He starts Freedom 250, which is his own institution, and to which millions of dollars are then siphoned off. We're going to talk to the congressman about this in detail when he comes on here in a minute. But this is the way that millions of dollars were just positioned somewhere else, and where donations were solicited for the sequicentennial on the part of Trump and the people running this nonprofit, and corporations who want access to the president, United Airlines and others. They are pouring money into this fund and knowing that this is really going to make the president happy and will put them on the good list. It's a way for political corruption, glad handing, all of that to take place. So that is there. But I want to make sure that you see this part, Matt, and I want to get your comment before the congressman joins us.
They paid out 10 million taxpayer dollars for a fleet of trucks running PragerU videos and an AI-generated George Washington that tells school kids that their rights are a gift from God, something the real Washington never said. They're parading these proselytizing propaganda trucks in front of schools on your dime. They've turned what should be a non-political unifying celebration of America's 250th into a right-wing Christian battering ram aimed at breaking down what Thomas Jefferson called the wall of separation between church and state, enshrining their extreme version of Christianity as our de facto national religion. This agenda is not subtle. It fuses white Christian supremacist identity with history revisionism, insisting the nation's founding, its laws, and our fundamental rights are rooted in the Christian Bible rather than the revolutionary principle of self-government.
So that is creeping theonomy. We have PragerU as the taxpayer-funded recipient, freedom trucks spreading PragerU propaganda. What do you think here, Matt, before the congressman jumps in?
I think that that's a very good summary, actually. And I just wanted to highlight two other dimensions of this that do show up in the committee report, but are not in the little clips of the video that you showed. If you remember, I think it was May 17th, there was this big event on the National Mall called Rededicate 250, rededicating the nation to God. And all these people looked at them like, doesn't that violate the separation of church and state? Isn't this supposed to be like a bipartisan commemoration of the 250th anniversary? Yes, it does violate the separation of church and state. Yes, this was supposed to be bipartisan. It was created with this America 250 organization that was bipartisan to do this. And instead they brought in they created this Freedom 250 sidecar, siphoned all the resources into that. And then that was what sponsored Rededicate 250. I also just want to note, just because it was in the headlines, all these people, all these musical artists who are supposed to perform at this great state fair, they were recruited under the premise of America 250. This is supposed to be this big bipartisan thing. It's not this like Trump thing. This is what the Congress created. And then when they discovered that it was actually Freedom 250, that it was this partisan Christian nationalist agenda, that's why they all bailed, right? Was because they were like, they were deceived themselves about what they were actually supposed to do.
Well, joining us now is Congressman Jared Huffman. Congressman,
hey,
thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Am I coming
We've
through
been,
okay?
we've been talking about you, so your ears might be ringing. But we showed a couple of clips of the video that you put out last week as ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee for the Democrats. We've been talking about the report. Matt just gave us a breakdown of the PragerU Freedom Truck situation. But given all of that, just want to ask you, you spent a year basically going through the mechanics behind the scenes of the difference between America 250 and Freedom 250. The findings in the report, as somebody who's read it, are damning, but you must have so much more information and rage than even we do as somebody who spent all of this time putting it together.
As well as a whole bunch of trails that need to be followed and questions that still need to be answered. Yes, all of that and more. This is a twisted tale of corruption and just, craven abuse of the public trust and potentially even some crimes. So we know a lot from the investigation, and the 55-page report just tries to lay it out in a very factual way that should be above politics. We tried to do that in our video rollout too, but we're not done here. And there are a lot of things that I would like to do to get answers that I can't because I'm in the minority in Congress right now. That may very well change in the not too distant future.
Let me pick up on that, Congressman, because I think a lot of people recognize, like, when you're in the majority, there's certain privileges, certain abilities that you have in Congress or within these committees versus when you're in the minority. Practically, what would that mean in this case? Because as Brad said, the report is excellent. It gives this really fascinating, factual breakdown of this history, but it's toothless, right? Because it's a report at this point that exposes these things. But what more power would you have within the committee and within Congress? What more could be done if the Democrats had the majority come 2027?
Yeah. So Matt, it's night and day. And this is something I hear a lot from regular folks out there. When we tell them that our toolbox is limited when we're in the minority, they don't quite get why that is. Why can't you issue subpoenas? Why can't you initiate proceedings and do all these things? Because we don't have those tools legally. If you're in the majority and you write firm demand letters for information to federal agencies, they kind of have to respond. When you are a Democrat in the minority in this Congress and with this administration especially, they just blow you off. And so all of our investigations and inquiries have been met with either silence or actual obstruction by the administration. Now, if you're in the majority, you can back that up with subpoena power. You can back that up with the ability, with standing to go to court if you need to. You don't have that when you're in the minority. You also have the ability to have hearings to set the agenda and get people in to testify under oath so that if they lie to you, now we're talking about perjury and contempt and things like that. So the tools are, totally different and almost totally missing when you're in the minority.
Is there a sense, Congressman, that these twin foundations that I see at play in this instance of the 250th anniversary is hijacking? One, Christian nationalism, the freedom trucks, the George Washington saying things as an AI agent he never said in real life, the just the misinformation about American history on one side. On the other, the rampant corruption. Is there a sense that, I know Matt's wondering this too, that this message about corruption in conjunction with affordability in the economy is going to be able to make its way to the kind of the national public in a way that we need it to?
I think so. I think it's breaking through right now, actually. The polling suggests that people are very upset about this corruption story, which is unfolding every day. We learn something more about a crypto scam or some other self-enrichment scheme with these guys. And I think the reason it's breaking through is that people are struggling out there, and they understand that as they're struggling, not only are these guys breaking their promise to lower costs and make life easier for them, but they are feeding at the public trough, actually getting rich off their taxpayer dollars in many cases, while they, lavish the billionaires with tax breaks and deregulatory favors and so forth. So yeah, it has real resonance right now. And this story about Freedom 250, about the PragerU scams, about, all this weaponization of faith that is part and parcel of this bread and circus spectacle that they are offering to struggling Americans, is going to be, I think, of great interest for weeks to come.
Congressman, you have a book out recently, and I'd love to. It's related to the topic here because I want to cue that up. Thank you for pulling that up, Brad. So the book, people might not know this just from maybe not living in your district, but you are one of the few. Let me see how I can phrase this: avowedly non-religious. Is that a fair phrasing?
Not at all, Matt. I'm the only member out of 535 in the House and the Senate dumb enough to admit publicly that I don't believe in God.
There you go. Okay. The only, and you've written a book about the experience of being in the House and watching this growing tide of theonomy, of Christian nationalism, Christian supremacy, making its way into the chambers of Congress. Can you just tell us about your perspective? Even you have a background in religion, but you don't identify with it anymore. What is it like to watch this stuff on the ground day by day enter into the lives of your colleagues, into the chambers, into the dialogue and the debate that goes on there?
It's appalling. And I say that as not with any hostility towards religion or faith or people of faith, but as someone who just always assumed that our nation's capital was, kind of a secular citadel, that church-state separation was the bedrock of our democracy, and that, the freedom to think for yourself and keep religion out of government is sort of something that's uniquely and importantly American. Those walls of separation have been breaking down big time in recent years, and this has been a building reckoning for me. It really kicked in with Trump won, and the title of my book, No Prophets, it evokes a subculture of Christianity that you two are experts in. This is the prophetic Christianity, the New Apostolic Reformation gang, and their cohorts that have sort of taken the evangelical world by fire. Trump brought a lot of those folks out of the fringe and into a national platform with his first campaign. I believe, and I think you would likely agree with me, that they're the reason he won the presidency in the first place. The Cyrus anointing and all of this prophetic stuff that went viral and enabled, him to prevail over seriously religious competitors for the Republican nomination. But then he started governing with this group that he had empowered and platformed. And that to me was deeply alarming. So that's kind of what triggered me to come out as a humanist. I had been in my little environmental lane. I'm a former environmental attorney. I went to Congress to work on water and wildlife and public lands and all these other things. But I found myself really drawn into this, and it's become a huge part of the work I do, founding the Free Thought Caucus. And you mentioned, Matt, that I have a background I was very religious as a young man, so I'm intrigued by this stuff. And you two have sort of become my surrogate religion professors. I've wonked out with you about hermeneutics and all kinds of things, and I'm just so grateful for all the education you've provided me, because in this book I really wanted to get it right.
Well, the book is No Prophets: The Fight to Save Democracy from Christian Nationalism. And I'll just, as a kind of final question, I know your time is limited. I've argued for a long time that Christian nationalism is not the idea that if you love God and love country, you're a Christian nationalist. Nope. You love your country, great. You love your God, awesome. Christian nationalism is the idea that you get more of the country because you love God. Because I love God, I get more of the country than you. And I've argued that for a long time, you cannot have a democracy if you have a round table of people who are sitting there who are indigenous, Black, Asian, Latino, people who are Christian, Jewish, Muslim, humanist, atheist, Wiccan. And the Christian stands up and says, look, it's great everyone's here. It's actually not great that some of you here, and I'm going to work on getting rid of a bunch of you. But for the most part, it's fine that you're here. I just need you to know that around this table, I'll always get a different status than you. I'll always have a different place at the table than you because I'm a Christian, probably because I'm a white Christian, but just we'll start with the Christian part. To me, that's the anti-democratic part of Christian nationalism. You have seen things that I have not. You are, as Matt just said, you're part of a congressional operation where you have a view of our nation's status that most people don't. Does that resonate with you, or what would you want to add to that sort of anti-democratic component of Christian nationalism that runs through your book?
Super. I think that's what it's all about. That's why I think this book is about democracy at least as much as religion, and maybe more. You can't separate the two right now. And you're exactly right. One of the tropes that Christian nationalists love to use is this naked public square, that people who have championed church-state separation and the Supreme Court decisions starting in the 1960s that, required secular purposes for our laws and things like that, that it was about, creating this almost sanitized national discourse where you couldn't have faith. You couldn't bring your values from your faith into our national conversation. It's a total straw man, fake thing. But this naked public square is one of their more effective tropes. And they've sort of weaponized it now to just say, we got to be done with church-state separation entirely, because it's created this sanitized public square where people of faith are persecuted and victimized. And that has been taken to extremes under this second Trump administration. So we talk about the Freedom 250 fiasco, and Christian nationalism is really very much at the heart of that. But it's not happening in a vacuum. They're also doing the Religious Liberty Commission, whose sham report came out a couple weeks ago, and they say the quiet part out loud. They are just trying to end church-state separation. They act like it's never even been a thing. Separately, they've got their anti-Christian bias task force that's roaming through all of our federal agency HR offices and looking for anything that upsets a particular extreme conservative Christian sensibility, and considering that an attack on Christianity. So this is a heck of a moment. I've never seen anything like it. And I don't know if you folks can find a parallel in our history. McCarthyism, maybe, but this is crazy stuff, and we've got to call it out.
Could not agree more. Thankful for this report, the 55-page report. Thankful for the video that you put out. As scholars, we just found it to be really clear and insightful, and it also is just alarming. I had one person say, "Hey, I really appreciate Congressman Huffman doing this video. I'm just worried that he wasn't sort of full of rage and anger as he did it." And I was like, I think as a congressperson, he was trying to present a very professional kind of informational perspective. My guess is that he has felt some of what you're gesturing at there over the last year, which is just, frustration, anger, and so on at the state of things. And so one more time, folks, the book is No Profits, The Fight to Save Democracy from Christian Nationalism. We're hoping we'll have Congressman Huffman back for a Sunday interview where we can dig into the book in much more length. But thank you for stopping by today. Thanks for a few minutes of your time, and thanks for standing up against Christian nationalism in Congress.
No, I'm so grateful. The book officially launches August 18th, but available for pre-order now. And I can't wait to come back and talk with you more about it. And also, your listeners and readers know this, but you two are superstars.
No.
You are as good as it gets in this space of both knowing your theology and following the different, crazy trails into our politics and connecting it all up in a way that's understandable. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for the work of the Free Thought Caucus as well. You guys are doing the Lord's work, whether you name it as the Lord's work or not.
All right, y'all. That's going to do it for us today. Appreciate you being here on Access Live with us. And as I said, go subscribe to our Substack. Check the show notes for the Access Daily Brief. Be back live on Friday, 1:30 Eastern. We're here every weekday in your inbox doing analysis on politics and religion, and just trying to step up to the plate to bring the most important stories to the foreground. Thanks for being